Hello friends, welcome to the lecture on file handling. This is part 2 of our previous file handling chapter. In this particular chapter or in this particular lecture, we'll go through various details or various functions that are available while we play around with files in Perl. So first and foremost, we'll see what exactly we mean by dollar dot or this particular line. So dollar dot, within the less than and greater than operator sign, we'll have a variable called as data and underscore underscore end underscore underscore. So let's say if I want to have the contents of my file within the script itself. So how exactly we'll do that? So instead of opening the file or keeping my data into a separate text file or an etc or a CSV file, if my data is, let's say, some kind of a stagnant data which will never change, but that needs to be read from some other file. So what I can do is I can simply write this inside my script file itself. I'll use an end underscore underscore end underscore underscore. Inside this or below this, what I'll do is I'll write all my data. So let's say my data is like first line, second line, third line. So this is my data that needs to be kept inside a file. Now how do I read this particular data? So I've kept this data inside the script file itself. So this is my script file and I've kept the data here itself. Now to read this, I'll simply say while less than greater than sign and the data variable. Inside this, I'll simply go ahead and say print dollar dot is my line number and dollar underscore will give me the default data while I'm reading this particular data from the end tags or from the end of the file. So now if I go ahead and print or if I execute this particular program, you will see that the output is like first line, second line and third line. So simple. We have kept the data here inside our script file, and what we have done is we have read this particular thing using the data operator or using the data variable. So this is one of the very interesting features that Perl has, and you can always use that if at all you're sure what you're doing in terms of putting the data inside your script file. Next is how we can use the @argv array. So this is one of the most important and you can say real good feature in Perl, where you can just provide your inputs at the script level itself. So let's say here, while executing the script, if I need to provide some kind of input that is required by the script, so for example I'm providing few numbers here like 10, 20, 30. So this can be collected, or these are then stored in the default array, that is @argv. So argv @argv is a default array in Perl. So let's see how we can actually get the data from this particular array. So I would simply go ahead and say print input data, that is @argv. Remember, you need to write everything in caps. This is the default array in Perl. Now if I go ahead and execute this particular program and see what exactly happens here, you will see we have got input data 10, 20 and 30. So for example, now your program accepts couple of data or three couple of data from the input parameters. So what you can do is you can have a strict type check also, that you can place it in your script file. So I would say $#argv should be equal to 1. Okay, so this is, if you remember, this is something, this is the way we can actually get the length of the array. So I'm doing nothing but actually taking the length of argv array. So I'm saying it should only have two values associated with it, and what I'll do is I'll simply use this particular or print this particular statement if my condition is fulfilled, or I will simply go ahead and say invalid arguments, invalid number of args. Okay, and simply exit from the function, as there is nothing else that we need to do because the arguments that are provided are not correct. So if I do something like 10, 20 and if I execute it, So it has printed the data. But now if I add 30 to this particular list, it will say invalid number of arguments and it has exited. So this is how you can use the @argv array. Let us move on to one of very important topics when it comes to using files or working with files in Perl. So these are the file test operators. What these operators say is basically, so for example, in the previous lecture on file handling, what we had done is we had simply opened a file without knowing whether it existed, without knowing whether we can read the data from a file, or for that matter, when we actually wanted to write data to a file, we never saw whether the right permission is there on that particular file. So in order to do that, what we'll do is before opening a file, we'll have few of these checks associated with it. So for example, to check whether a file exists or not, I'll simply say -e and the file name. So we'll go to our previous lecture, the code here basically, and we'll simply use this particular file itself, and we'll see whether this particular file subroutine.pl exists or not. If it exists, then we'll go ahead and quickly check whether this file is readable or not. So these are very few of the file test operators. We'll talk more about these file test operators. We'll go through a PowerPoint presentation where you will see there are a lot of file test operators that are available in Perl, and they are quite helpful. So I have marked few of these operators in bold to understand which of these operators are really important, and they'll be used every now and then. So we'll simply get this particular code again, and what we'll do is we'll again open this particular file, okay, here, and we'll simply copy this code here. So now what we are doing is we are not directly opening the file, or we are not just relying on whether the open works successful or not. We are first checking whether the file exists or not. Then we are checking whether it is readable or not. Once these two conditions have passed for this particular file in consideration, then we are going ahead and checking open. Now, then we will see whether the open was successful or not. So, if we go ahead and execute this particular program, what we'll see is that it has opened successfully. Now let's say I'll simply go ahead and change the name of the file, and if I go ahead and execute it, you'll find there is no output that is associated with this particular file, because a file name subroutine without e does not exist. So these are few of these operators that we'll look into. We'll go through the PPT as I said. So moving ahead, we'll first actually go through and execute few of these functions. So there are other functions that are associated with reading of data, or how you can actually read some part of the data from a particular file. So now what I'll do is I'll quickly go through the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. In this particular case, if you see, these are the file test operators in Perl. So is your file a block device, a character device? So these come into picture when you are working on a Linux operating system, whether your file is a directory or not. So in case you want to check whether it's a directory, you'll simply use the -d, just the way we used -e. Whether the file in consideration is an ordinary file or not. Then these two again, -g, -k, belong to Unix operating system. Whether your file is a symbolic link. So again, these kind of checks are applicable on Linux operating system. So if it is a symbolic link, naturally your name start or your file attributes start with L. Then you have to check whether it was readable, which is what we have seen. If it is an empty file, if it is a non-empty file, so S is used for non-empty check, Z is used for an empty check. You can see there are various operators which are available. You can use as per your convenience, but these are most of the used kind of operators that we can use in daily, whenever we play around with files. You can use them on regular basis. So whether your file is a writable file, it is an executable file, whether it is an empty file, so all these kind of checks you can perform every now and then whenever you keep on playing with file, whether it is a text file. So you can go through this particular list and you can always go ahead and practice few of these examples. But most of the important operators I've marked it in bold, so you can very well remember these operators. Going ahead, as I said, we have various functions that will help us to actually get the data from a file in the form of chunks. So if I don't really want to go through the entire file, or if I know few of the things that I'm reading, so rather than really opening the entire file and getting the data, I can use various other commands, or even I can use the read command, which is simply to read a buffer, read some kind of a buffer data, and then it get it stored in a scalar variable. So we'll see each of these command in detail. So let us first start with tell. What exactly tell means is, tell gives you the distance in bytes between the beginning of the file and the current position in the file. So we'll see how exactly it works. Along with this, we'll work on seek. So what seek means is to get your pointer point in a file by skipping a particular part, or skipping the number of bytes you specify, depending depending on the relative to variable. So relative to is nothing but 0, 1 and 2. So seek means I'll get my pointer positioned to a particular point in the file with respect to either from the beginning of the file, from the current position of the file, or from the end of the file. So for example, if I want to skip, let's say 20 bytes from beginning of the file, my seek command would be seek file variable, that is my file variable that I have used to open the file. As I have to skip 20 bytes, I'll say 20 comma 0. So let us first understand how this will actually work. So I'll simply go ahead and execute this seek command. So what we'll do is, we have opened here our file. So we'll simply say seek, okay, and inside the seek command we'll pass the file variable along with, let's say, the number of bytes we want to skip is 20, and from the beginning of the file. So this will actually skip 20 bytes from the beginning of the file. If the output of the seek command is a non-zero output, then it has passed. So let's say I'm taking the output of the seek command in op variable, scalar variable, and what I'll do is I'll simply say if $op, then just go ahead and use the tell command to tell me the current position of the pointer in the file. So the current position of the pointer would be using the file variable, that is file, with which we have opened the file, and collect this particular output into another scalar variable, that is, let's say, offset. Okay, so this offset will have the current position of the file. I will simply go ahead and print the current position of pointer in the file. Okay, and that is $offset. Okay, now let's go ahead and execute our program. So remember, what we have done is we have moved 20 bytes from the beginning. Thereafter, what we have done is we have got the position of our pointer. So if you go ahead and execute this, you will see current position of the pointer in the file is 20. Okay, and after the, so we have skipped 20 bytes, and from the 20th byte we have then opened our file, or we have then used the while operator, use the while loop inside the file operator to actually print the contents of the file. So it has actually skipped the first 20 bytes. So if you go ahead and see the file, it had these particular statements. So now the printing of this particular file has started from this particular line, or from here onwards. So it has skipped this much. The non-highlighted part has been skipped because we have moved 20 bytes from the start of the file. So I hope skip part is seek and tell part are pretty much clear now. Now we'll see how read actually works. So read basically is a command to read chunk of data from the particular file. So in read, again we specify the following parameters. It says this is the file variable. In result, you'll have a scalar variable which will hold the data that you want to read from a particular file. Length is the number of bytes that you want to read, and skip, if you want, you can specify, this is an optional parameter, to basically skip the number of bytes and then go ahead reading the number of bytes you want to read from that particular point. So let us use read now. What we'll do is, at the same juncture where we had uh, actually used the tell command, what we'll do is, after this particular statement we'll use a read command. So inside read command, as I said, we'll use the file variable. So remember, at this particular point we'll be at the 20th location, or we have skipped the 20th byte and we'll be at the 21st byte at this particular position. So from here, what we'll do is, we'll have a temp variable, a scalar variable, in which we'll read the data, and we'll read the data from the 20th location till 50th byte. So this is how I mentioned 50 bytes. So I want to read 50 bytes after I have skipped, or I have come to the 20th byte in the file. Now I'll simply go ahead and print my read data. So I'll say block of data, and I'll use the scalar variable that we have used to store the data, that is temp. Okay, we'll simply go ahead and define temp here, my $temp. Okay, so now let's go ahead and execute this particular piece of code. So as you can see, the block of data we have got is this particular block of data from the 20th location till 50 bytes of data is being read here. So this is how read works, and after that we could actually go ahead and execute this particular loop. So this started basically from calling a subroutine. So it actually started from here. So this particular loop started from here. So when we used read command or read command, it read 50 bytes. Thereafter, whatever remaining part was there, the pointer went to that particular position and it started reading that particular data that is inside the while loop. So I hope this is pretty much clear of what we have done here in this particular lecture. So remember friends, three important commands: seek, tell and read. You can actually play along with your position of your pointer inside a file. Seek will actually help you to go to a particular or skip a particular number of bytes inside a file, move to a particular location or an offset inside a file. From there on, you can actually read any number of data, that any number of bytes of data that you want, and you can store them inside a temporary variable. Similarly, tell gives you the current position of the pointer from the beginning of the file. Okay, I hope friends this is pretty much clear. This is the end of the lecture on file handling, and I'll see you guys at the next lecture. Thank you.